Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and I am joined today to make things as confusing as possible by another Daniel R. Staker. He has 15 years in sales and marketing, over a decade of experience at the executive level in organizations of all size. He is a former attorney, and he is a big behavioral psychology enthusiast and studies how to apply those things to the world of marketing. He has just written a new book called To Market, How to Give a Damn and Take Things to the Next Level. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've never felt more official in my life. Wow.
Well, we won't tell them about the Vampire Weekend and the Clash posters behind you. That would make you feel unofficial. Both great bands, though, so hard to be mad about that.
Yeah, this is our music room and that I'm in right now, so it's hard to take myself too seriously in here.
Very good. So one thing that I love about this is you call this, we've known each other for years. We've had lots of good conversations about the business and psychology, but you call this a book from a breakdown. And I really like that phrasing. You know, when I sent you the Zoom link today, you said it had been 200 and something days since you had logged into a Zoom meeting, which made me very, very jealous. Tell us about the breakdown and how it led to this book.
Absolutely. So I love what I do, and I've been so lucky to be able to do it at very high levels. Publicly traded companies, large organizations. I love people. I think people are the most fascinating things in the world. And I've always viewed my work in sales and marketing as really kind of a concierge role of like, people exist, people have problems, and good sales and marketing will help them with problems and connect them. And I found a lot of meaning in that. So you have this quest to understand people in the objective of a goal. And that's what I love. That's not always what you get to do at work, and the jobs I've had have come with great, things that are great and things that aren't so great. I found one of the things that I didn't love was sort of just a constant pressure to do things that I didn't think were advisable. And I'm not talking about anything unethical or whatever, just marketing sales strategies. You'll have a marketing role and a CEO will come and say, hey, we should do this. And you say, oh, that's a phenomenally bad idea. And then they'll say, well, we're doing it. And by the way, you're 100% accountable for doing it. So it was a tough world. And eventually I was just surviving off antacids and like cuss words. I started having panic attacks. There's one day where it was a weekend and me and my wife thought I was having a heart attack. And she had gotten the phone and was about to dial 911. Like her hand is like on the button. And I thought, this is so weird. I haven't felt anything like this since. And then I remembered college. I was like, oh, don't call the police. Don't call 911. Don't call 911. It's a panic attack. And but those started coming back in my life. And eventually, like the toll on my health was unworkable. So I went into my boss, and he was very supportive. I said, I can't continue to do this. And they said, could you get us through the end of the year? And I said, absolutely, I can get you through the end of the year. And so we made a transition plan. They were wildly supportive. And on December 30th, 2022, I worked my last day as a W-2 employee and have been doing boutique consulting gigs ever since.
Thanks for your willingness to talk about that. We just the episode, this will drop some weeks after this, but the episode that just dropped this week with Jay Coulter, he was talking about a very similar thing about how his own mental health journey, how his friend's suicide was really what it took to sort of catalyze this transition into doing work that was meaningful for him and important for him, sometimes it feels like it really does take, hitting rock bottom to sort of hit that cliche, to sort of snap us back to reality, to help us know how we should be spending our time.
Absolutely. It's funny. I had an employee come to me once and say they were very unhappy. And I said, hey, we'll do some things at work to try and make you happy. But the headline here is, you have to change your life. Like, there's no dress rehearsal for life. This is it. Like, this is your brief time on the stage. And so it took me a long time to follow my own advice. When I finally did, I woke up one morning, and for the first time in 15 years, I didn't have a job. Mm-hmm. And so I opened the laptop and I just started like frantically writing all the things that I had learned over like these 15 years of like trauma and joy and success and failure and things I couldn't get people to listen to, things that I knew to be true, but that people didn't always value the way I thought they should be valued. And when it was done, I had like a 4-page list of bullet points. And then I noticed, hey, a lot of these themes, or a lot of these group around a theme. And one big theme was, people get marketing and sales wrong because they don't have the proper foundation. And so much of that proper foundation is just understanding people, understanding how they work and operate. And you absolutely need that before. And then the second part of the book is, when you get into execution, you can have all the proper understanding you need, but then if you execute poorly, it doesn't go well. So if you have foundation and execution, my belief is, you can market.
So, I talk about in my book, The Behavioral Investor, I talk about how people are sort of the fundamental units of capital markets. And I talk about, advances in physics and science. And basically, once we understood atomic structure, that we could kind of like take things and make big advances in science. And, I think the same thing is true of finance and as we'll talk about today, marketing. Can you talk about how marketing sort of combines, behavior as this fundamental unit of marketing and how that foundational piece exists?
Yes, absolutely. This is what launched me into this industry. When I first started getting a glimpse into this world, I noticed that so much of marketing was process oriented. So much of sales was process oriented. Salespeople will make a call with an invite. They'll do a thing. They'll, hey, come to this meeting and I'll tell you about investment strategies, whatever. And those are all great things to do, but sometimes we see them as processes. So I do this invite to get them to this thing. If they come, I move them into this group, and then they get this email. And if they don't respond to this email, they get this other email. And the processes can be great, but they have to be supported by the people. If you don't really think about the people first, you've put the cart before the horse. So one of the things I noticed when I got into this world, I'd say, well, like, tell me about our customer. And people would be like, oh, our customers, are just hungry to find a software that will help them do this. And I'd be like, I've never heard anyone talk that way in my life. Or I worked for a corporate training company, and I'd be like, say, what keeps our customers up at night? And they'd say, oh, silos. I thought, I have never known anyone who like, oh, I couldn't sleep last night. Why couldn't you sleep? I was just up so late worrying about silos in my organization. That could be an element of what they're up worried about. So what I found was you have to really get to know the customer. You have to understand that people need to make about 35,000 decisions in a day. But most of these decisions are going to be made on gut instinct that like our conscious mind doesn't even enter into it a ton of the time. Right. So we started doing things, marketing approaches where we thought, okay, that person doesn't stay up late worrying about silos. That person stays up late, worrying about how the heck they're going to get dentists who they can't stand to like report what they need to another department. And that's a very human worry, or in the, the language for more of your listeners, I don't know that a lot of your customers are up late at night, like worrying about their, the percentage contribution from their check. They might be like getting a looming sense of dread that their kids are about to go to college. They might be getting a looming sense of dread that like they're 65 working in some like blue collar job they can't stand and they don't know how much longer their body's going to hold out. If you can understand the client on this level, like really get in their skin and see the world through their eyes, it will completely affect the way you set up all those processes, marketing processes later on, the invites and the emails and things. It could be the difference of like, hey, come to this, retirement summit to learn how, to invest wisely or whatever, versus like, do you feel the impending dread of your kids becoming college age? That is a much better lead in, because yes, I do. Like, are you curious how on earth you're going to get your kids to college? Are you curious how on earth you're going to retire? Gosh, I had this guy that I loved. His name was Sheffield Villiers, which is like the ultimate rich guy name. And he had invested very well. He was a very wealthy guy. And I was like a young 20-year-old, and I was with him, and I was with a friend, and the friend was like, so how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? And Sheffield was like, do you have an hour? And the kid was like, yeah. So he took me and this kid to go visit two elderly people in the neighborhood. One person, we showed up to a Medicaid group home, and it's just as bleak as you think. You walk in, it's summer, it's about 90 degrees inside, it smells. Bodily fluids that aren't cleaned up enough, like gross carpet, Fox News blaring at, like 110 decibels as everyone just kind of sits in this dark, musty living room, like rocking back and forth. So we visit a person, we say hi, we talk to them, we catch up, ask them how their kids are doing. And then he drives us to visit another older person he knows. And that person, I kid you not, had just pulled in the driveway and is like washing off a giant RV. And he's like, hey, Larry, where you been? He's like, oh, me and the wife, we're just driving across the country, yada, yada, yada. And then he turns to my friend who had been asking about investment advice. And he's like, that's the difference between doing what I told you and not doing what I told you. And it, such a powerful thing, but to make the unseen seeable. I told you early on, we make about 35,000 decisions in a day. We're not really spending a ton of time on most of them. If you can reveal the unseen and make it seeable, that lesson stuck with me forever. And that's why I, wear old clothes and drive old cars and whatever, because I'm always putting, he called it the coal pile, but I'm always adding to the coal pile. I'm never taking from the coal pile because, winter comes and you're going to need that coal to stay, warm through the winter. But I think that's just an illustration of the massive difference it makes to understand the people before you launch into the process. And when you understand the people, you'll be able to show them how this all matters on their terms.
So I think this is fantastic. I was listening to a podcast I really like called Choice Hacking, Jen Kleinhen's former guest of the show. But I was listening to her podcast yesterday, and it was the psychology of the downfall of JCPenney. And basically what it was they brought in this really like high polished executive from Apple. I forget his name, but they bring in this executive from Apple. And he sort of imposes this Apple, like Silicon Valley, high tech, high gloss worldview on JCPenney customers who really just like big sales and kind of like digging through the crates for stuff. And so I think in finance and marketing, we're often answering the wrong question, right? Like you said, I forget who to credit for this, but I've heard it said that financial advisors' clients, effectively every question of theirs is some permutation of, am I going to be okay? And like we're writing white papers about, whatever Indonesian REITs are doing, or like, what is our fixed income projection for the next decade? And like, they're just like, am I going to be okay? But I know that that we also have difficulties. People are poor reporters of their own behavior and their own motivations. So my question to you is then, how do we figure out what the clients want when they're often very bad at articulating it themselves?
Yeah, 100%. You're so wise. I'll give you a great example. Yeah, I love your example about Apple and JCPenney. I'll give you a great example of what you're talking about. I learned this in a confidential meeting. So I'll just say like a Fortune 100 retailer got a job at another Fortune 100 retailer. And they surveyed customers, and those customers said, oh, we don't like the clutter in the aisles. So they do some test stores and they make the aisles wider and they stop putting pallets down in the middle and they remove the clutter and sales plummet. Because it turns out people of that particular store love going through a bin.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they asked the customer, what do you want? And the customer said, oh, we want a clean aisle. And they're like, here's clean aisle. And they're like, oh, we're not into it.
Yeah.
So we don't know what we want. And this is the thing I talk about in the book. When incorporating feedback, people desperately want to be right. They want to give the right answer. Clean aisles is the right answer, right? No one's like, oh, I want to dirty your aisle. So the first place I've really encountered this in my life, it's not very professional, so I'm sorry, but I have family members who sold cars. I've worked around dealerships. I know the car buying process really well. People want me to buy cars for them. So I would always ask people, well, what are you looking for? And they always say, oh, I want something that gets good gas mileage. I want something that's reliable. And I want something that's, like safe in the snow, because I live in this hellscape where it's like snow and icy for half the year. And the thing is, you'll show them what they say they want and they do not want it at all. You're like, okay, you want this, like rather unexciting, like, sedan. And they're like, well, what about like the BMW 3 Series? Are those like cheaper to own over the long haul? And you're like, absolutely not. And they're like, oh, okay. And you'll learn, oh, but my neighbor just bought one and I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
So this is the hell of trying to get consumer feedback. It's hard, like logos, branding or whatever. You'll show someone a logo for like a new investment company and they'll be like, it should be a $sign with an arrow pointed up. And you're like, well, that's a little on the nose. Like, did you notice that like no company you do business with has something like that? Did you notice that like no company is named like Growing Everyday Investments or whatever? Like, none of the big companies, they have names like Fidelity or whatever, like, wow, that inspires trust. But it isn't like just telling the thing. But anyway, people get super literal because those are the right answers. Right. Investments Growing Every Day is the right thing to name the company. A $sign with an arrow pointing up is the right logo. So what I've found when you need to get this feedback to understand people is you have to take right out of the equation. You have to bury it so that they don't know the right answer. So if you're a money manager and you're trying to understand, the people you work with, don't ask them what they want. They'll give you right answers. A lot of times I'll prepare different surveys that give people like a frustratingly low amount of detail. Like, say I'm going to like test an email. I won't say, hey, is this email good? I won't say, hey, do you like this subject line? Because then that idea of like, I want to give the right answer starts creeping in. Instead, I'll take a guess and I'll make 5 subject lines with the same body. And then I'll send those to different people. And then I'll just ask them questions that have nothing to do with the email itself. Like, how much do you trust this organization? How friendly does this organization seem? Does it seem like they would get back to you in a timely way? Like, how likely are you to want to invest with this person? So now I've hidden what's right. They don't even know what they're evaluating. And they'll just say, oh, I thought this one was like mildly trustworthy. And usually one comes back and they're like, we thought this person was really trustworthy. And you're like, got it. That's the line in the copy I want to go with. But people, this weird thing happens when feedback becomes conscious. And people start, I think, giving themselves credit for being like eminently way more reasonable than we are. And the truth is, we're all just kind of like scrapping, getting through life, a lot of gut feeling and reactions and obeying the systems that have kept us alive for, 300,000 years. So if you respect those systems, things will go so much better for you.
Yeah, I like that. Trying to take social desirability out of it, being very aware. It's like we think our brains are like a communications department, right? Where we're just sort of literally spouting facts, but they're really a PR department, right? And so we said, hey, I want a sensible car that gets good mileage and it handles well in snow. It's like, no, you want a sexy car, you want a cool car, and then you want to back into some sensible reasons why you needed to buy that BMW 5 Series or whatever. I elevated it from a 3 to a 5. I wanted to.
Right. Well, you got a growing family. You're 100% right. Well, I find so much of sales and marketing is about reducing the client's cognitive dissonance. So the person who says, I want the reliable car, what they're really trying to do is, reduce the discomfort of really knowing themselves, right? We all have things we'd be wildly embarrassed if people knew about us, right? And we don't want to launch into those things publicly. So if I say, oh, I'm pretty vain, like I want a car nicer than my neighbor, that makes me feel bad.
Right.
If I can back into it, like you're saying, of like, well, it needs to be reliable. And like the BMW was rated, highly by Consumer Reports or whatever. Now I can kind of be like, quell my cognitive dissonance and say, I'm still the type of person I want to perceive myself as, and I can have the car I want.
Yeah. Now, it's an important lesson, right? Like the customer's not always right, and look for that emotional undercurrent that sort of undergirds whatever the stated facts are. So when we were talking before I hit record, you said something that I just love. I was like telling you a bit about my audience, and you said, look, guys like me, our job is trying to get your clients not to save, right? And so I think it's interesting to kind of know your enemy is too dramatic here, but like it's interesting to sort of like take a look under the hood, and a lot of the same tendencies. Your book talks about things like loss aversion, sunk cost, tribalism, that we're all familiar with in the investment world from a herding into a crowded trade perspective, or on the loss aversion front, the advisors who listen to my show get a lot more calls when the market is down than they get than they get fruit baskets when the market is up, right? So what does the average lay person need to know about people like you to move through the world in an informed way?
Absolutely. People listening couldn't see that I about threw my back out nodding while you were going through all that. I had this epiphany when I was really young. We would get the Sunday paper, and I would love looking at the ads. And because I was a kid, and there was this sense of like, oh my gosh, that would be amazing if I had this thing. Or like, look how happy that kid is in the ad. This one still cracks me up. Look at an ad for an above ground pool anytime, and you will see like the shortest, smallest bunch of family in that pool, like having the time of their lives. But we've all had that pool. Like, you step into that pool and it goes about like mid shin, and you're like, well, okay, now what? But go back and look at the ad, and they're throwing a beach ball in an above ground pool, like in a backyard, and it's amazing. And so as a kid, and I was going through this, and I felt terrible because I didn't have any money. My family was poor, and I thought, how am I ever going to be happy? And I had this epiphany that like I was up against people with college degrees that the Fortune 100 company whose ad I was looking at has a team of people who are designed to take my money, and that's stuck with me ever since. So yes, loss aversion you mentioned, I think that is the one I see most. It's such a primal thing. And by the way, I don't want to set myself up as better than anyone else. It totally works with me. You were talking about, advisors. And every time ours comes to the house twice a year, I deliberately try to talk to him as little as I can, because I think I will only mess it up.
Yeah.
But twice a year, he insists on coming to the house because he's a great guy. And so he'll open the computer with the fancy screen where like I can't see the stuff I'm not supposed to see, and he'll walk me through the numbers. And like the bad years, I'm like, great, like we're buying golden cigarettes. Like I'm taking everything out and I'm buying golden cigarettes. That's what I want to do. And the good years, I'm like, I should quit my job. Like this is amazing. Like if I can make this much without doing anything, why don't I just do that all the time? So my instinct is exactly opposite of what it should be.
Right.
But it's this thing of loss aversion like you're talking about. And I know how it works, and it still works on me. I was looking at some shoes the other day, and they were like, oh, like 4 pairs left. And I was like, oh, in my size, like I've got to act on this. And then I was like, it's happening, and I didn't. Another day I might have. But I think the key for what a lot of your listeners would be interested in, if this stuff can work against your clients, it can also work for your clients. If I'm running a marketing firm of a very large company and I have, a sophisticated team, who are posting things online and who, I have a budget of millions to take even more millions from the general public. I'm relying on these things, if for the advisors out there, your clients do not have a level playing field. Every day they are stepping into a world that is trying to separate them from their money. So I think one of the roles of, a great advisor or even just someone who wants to save and invest is to use that psychology in support of the investor. Before we were rolling, we also had this thing where I was talking about marketing, and I thought, getting the client in is only half the battle. Then, when my advisor comes to my house, periodically, am I going to write another check? And am I going to put more in? Am I going to, betray my natural instincts and all the people out there who are trying to push my psychological buttons to make me spend? And am I going to invest for my future? And so that is the thing everyone is up against. There's no immunity from it. It's hardwired into us. The best chance we have is we can use the same tactics, to a positive end, and you can just be aware that like you're not rational. I feel like that, I think of all like the biases I have, and sometimes I think I can confront them, and I think that's actually setting me up for greater failure. What I really need to do is respect them.
Yeah. So I've talked about, I can't remember if I said it on the podcast or not, but there's this idea in martial arts of the circular theory of self-defense, right? Where if someone throws a punch at you, rather than absorbing the full brunt of that punch, you kind of roll with it and use their exertion against them, right? Use that momentum against them to kind of throw them. And that's the way I think about behavioral science at its best. Like there's all these examples, right? If you look at, perhaps the most powerful behavioral finance intervention of all time was the Save More Tomorrow program, where they use the auto withdrawal and auto escalation of funds to get tens of billions in excess retirement funds by basically using our laziness and our status quo proneness to our benefit.
Yeah.
Are there practical examples of that you can think of from your world where people could take this knowledge and kind of be better informed consumers of ads as a result of this?
Absolutely. Well, you know what you were just talking about is a great thing, because it kind of recognizes, well, if psychology and instinct are the problem, like let's just totally take them out of the situation altogether. And that is a thing that we can do. I the story I started with, I don't look at ads. I avoid ads like the plague. And that could be a thing that all of us do. You can avoid all ads. I mean, they're on our bananas for crying out loud. But you're going to see some ads, but you can seriously reduce the amount of exposure you have. Or all of these things that work against us, as I've said, can work for us. Here's an example that I'm particularly fond of because it works so well. Early in my career, we would sell people and we'd invite them to this executive breakfast. And I think this might be relatable for a lot of your listeners. Like, hey, we're going to come to like a nice hotel. We're going to give you some overpriced poached eggs. And, we're going to get a bunch of ritzy people in, and we're going to like pitch them on what we do for 2.5 hours. And then we're going to let them go about their day. We wanted to make the executive breakfast free initially because we don't want to put in a bar, to anyone coming. The problem was most people wouldn't come. And then a lot of the people who signed up would be like, oh, well, I'm real busy this morning. I'm not going to be able to make it. And we weren't getting folks out. So I changed the psychology of it. And here I'm going to use loss aversion. Loss aversion doesn't have to be real, by the way. You can just create it. You can just create a sense of loss. Like the movie Castaway got you to cry when a volleyball died. This is our psychology. You can just create a sense of loss. So I got heavy bond paper that was very nice. Like you could see the pulp. That's somehow nicer. And we would send out these invitations like folded and sealed in wax. Like, hey, and inside the invitation there were these vouchers for free admission to our regularly $75 executive breakfast. And we calculated the amount, just like, oh yeah, this is, roughly what it costs us or whatever. And like, okay, so here's free admission to our $75 executive breakfast. And it was the weirdest thing. Now they had the tickets in their hand and they didn't want to lose them. Mm-hmm. So people start, instead of writing us and being like, oh, it's not a good time or I'm really busy that morning, they're like, I'm busy, but could I send my assistant for me? Or I'm busy, but could I send my friend in my place? They didn't want to lose this thing we created. So, if loss aversion all the time, that thing that's making me say, that wants me to order those shoes because there's only 4 left in my size. I often wonder, if advisors, did things like, here's where you should track and here's where you're losing. If it wouldn't radically change our behavior. Yeah. Because I don't want to lose progress. Yeah. I don't want to lose progress even more than I want to gain progress, right? There's my wife's family has an amazing story about this. I freaking love this because it's my wife's grandma, Bobby, lived to be 103, and the timer on her oven broke. And so she called the repair guy, and the repair guy said, yeah, that'll be $65. And who knows how much $65 was for this, 103-year-old woman. It's probably, $1,000 an hour or something. And she said she thought about getting it fixed. And then she pictured herself holding a $5 egg timer and $60 in her other hand. And that felt way better to her than getting it fixed. So she flipped the loss aversion. At first, it's like, oh, this thing I bought in sunk costs, I've bought this oven and it doesn't even work. And now I've got to pay this other $65 just to keep it working. But through that kind of imagery, she suddenly didn't want to lose that $60 she could imagine herself holding. And I think that's like one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard.
Yeah. So there's so much great psychology in these stories, right? Like loss aversions prominently on display, but also the idea of salience. This is something that I just don't think we understand enough or use enough in the business, is that making something real imbues it with an emotional power and sort of an emotional valence that leads us to make different decisions, right? Like imagining $60 in her hand, that $60 becomes real. The egg timer and the $60, the butcher paper, the whatever the card stock, thing with a $75 imputed value, like that feels like a loss of $75 because it's real and you can hold it in your hand. And suddenly I'm looking for ways to offload this to someone who can come instead of just flaking on the Evite or whatever. So anytime we can make these things real, I think there's real power in that. There's a couple of concepts in the book that I think translate well to the world of investing, right? And one of them is that we often fail to respect reality. What do you mean when you say we fail to respect reality?
Yeah. Well, so I was a kid and I, grew up the very tail end of a big unathletic family and at the end of a dirt road, and we just didn't play sports. And so the first time I ever played sports, like everyone laughed at me, and I just knew that I didn't like that feeling, right? But I grew up in an era where PE, physical education, was a little more than like rolling out a cart of basketballs. And so I had to learn to like pass and rebound and whatever. But I would never take the shot because people laugh at you. Then one day, I was playing a game and it was clear my teammate was like of the same school I was. And like someone just had to take a shot. And I took a shot and I made it. And I took a shot and I made it. And from this little thing, I concluded that I was an amazing basketball player, and then this is like the problem of like too small of a sample size, right? So then I parlay that success into some more moderate success. And then one day I show up in a gym and there's a guy there who's like plays on it like for a D1 school. And I'm like, well, time to show him who the real talent is. And this guy wrecked me, like without passion or interest. Like he was checking his watch in the middle of the game, and he destroyed me. And it was always this lesson to me of like, oh gosh, like how quickly we can completely untether ourselves from facts and reality. So this is a problem I see when people are executing on a strategy. And in the investment world, you have this issue of like, I'll do it for example, a real life. I opened an account for my daughter because I want to show her that like investing is great and it's fun. The reality is investing is sometimes great and fun. Like it's always great. It's sometimes fun. And so I would show her when things were going up, and I opened this account in like, the middle of the pandemic when like we're all just getting checks and like things are going nuts. And, the market's on this unprecedented tear. And I'm like, look, Michaela, you made, like $1,400, in the last year, just not doing anything. And to her, she's very young. That's like an incredible amount. But what I was doing was that same thing of instilling in her this non-respect for reality of like, the reality isn't that like she was I think she made like 28% on her investment that year or something. And there are years like that, right? The next year we dipped way below principal. The reality is you average, like a 9% return or something. But it's never 9%. The reality is it's up, it's down. And when we don't respect that reality, we start making bad decisions. So I think to the extent that we can get people to understand reality and to accept it, we get better results.
So, first of all, I mean, I'm in violent agreement with you, but, I'm going to draw on your behavioral chops here. Because if you look at something like the up 28% year, well, or even the down big year,
yeah.
Telling someone that stocks, average 9 or 10% a year when they're up 28%, you can tell them that, but it doesn't sink in. Like the euphoria of the up 28%, the plus $1,400 for a young kid is like, yeah, that's sort of a knife to a gunfight, right? Like the facts of reality are the knife, and the emotion is the gun, whether it's a good or a bad. I think about something like death, right? Like we all we all kind of know we're going to die, right? Like you ask anyone like, hey, are you going to live forever? Like, no, I'll die. But like, we don't know until you get that bad diagnosis. So like how, from a behavioral perspective, when this emotional sort of, this emotional distortion field is so pronounced, how can we get people to accept reality in the face of this emotional distortion field?
Yeah. One of the things, by the way, I don't know, and I'm sure there's a lot of good answers. I think I have tiny bits of the answer, but like the thing about people is, we're so not understood. I mean, in psychology, we're just practically past the leeches stage. So there's so much to learn. But yeah. So one of the things I think we can do is focus on input measures instead of output measures, and sort of make that the reality. So I was making a bad mistake in saying, hey, look how much you grew and didn't earn. I would be like, hey, look, you put into this every month. Good for you. Like, that's what we should celebrate. I once heard this amazing post-game interview with Ray Allen. And the reporter was like, hey, why weren't you shooting the ball well tonight? And he's like, I shot the ball well tonight. And the reporter was like, your stat line was, 3 of 17 or something. And he's like, no, I shot the ball well. Just didn't go in the hoop. And they're like, can you elaborate? And he's like, yeah, I was in system. I was square to the basket. My feet were set. Like, I took good shots. I was open. Ball didn't go in the basket. And I was so impressed by how well this guy, understood what this was all about. I recently read about a bunch of studies. This is embarrassing. I contemplated making a vision board, and I just felt like so lost in my life. I was like, well, maybe if, I get out some poster paper and I glue a Porsche 911 on there, maybe that's like what will do this. And then I got curious. I was like, do these even work?
Really have a breakdown. That's
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. We've only done like the PG version of the breakdown. Like, this is like the Hallmark one. But yeah, I was in crisis, full on crisis. And so in reading about this, I learned that not only do they not work, which you shouldn't shock anyone, they're actually detrimental. There were these researchers, one was at UCLA, one was at another California university. I can't remember which right now. But they did this with sports. They did it with like grades. They did it with a bunch of things. I'll do the grade one because I think it was the first. They divided students into 3 groups. One was a control. One group, they asked them to spend like 10, 15, 20 minutes every day visualizing getting a great grade in the class. The other group, they asked them to spend 10, 15, 20 minutes every day visualizing the methods they would use to get the good grade in the class. The control group, was in the middle when it was all said and done. The group that visualized the end performed worse, and the group that visualized process-oriented things performed best. What they found was the group that visualized doing well actually had a false sense of already attaining what they wanted. So it can actually be detrimental. So part of, what we need to do to respect reality is to get a sense for what we control and don't control. I see so much of this, on LinkedIn and everywhere, of like, you make your own luck and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, well, yeah, I understand why it's convenient and really helpful to believe that. But the truth is, we're all subject, advisors don't make the market. We're all subject to these things that we don't entirely control. That's why when we put the focus back where the locus of control is, it's so much better for people, and this respect for reality comes more naturally.
I love the Ray Allen example you gave. I grew up, and my dad had a maniacal focus on paying off our house when I was a kid. So, I grew up in a strict religious household, and, we couldn't swear and everything, which and probably pretty standard for kids. But the word debt was a 4-letter word. I mean, my dad would literally not let us say the word debt, just like it was any other 4-letter word. And he had this poster board up in his closet that was like however much he owed, a picture of a house, like with however much he owed on the house broken up into whatever the dollar segment was. And each time he paid down a bit of the house, he would color it in. So I inherited this weird habit from my dad. So every year when I'm setting my New Year's resolutions, I used to put like the place I wanted to get, right? Like I want to have this much in the bank. I want, this goal at the gym, this goal with family or whatever. And now I put the steps that it takes to get there, right? So instead of I want to bench press whatever, now it's like I want to bench press this week, this week, 5 pounds more the next week, on and on from there. And the process, investing's so weird because you can do the right thing and get a bad result, or you can do the absolute stupid thing and have a fantastic result. I'm really looking forward to watching the Dumb Money movie that's coming out soon, because I wrote in one of my books that you can be right and still be a moron, right? Like you can get the right result and still be bad. So a big part of honoring reality and respecting reality is respecting process. So the last one that I want to ask about, we'll let people buy the book and figure out the rest of the chapters, but maintaining a long-term focus is one of the absolute hallmarks of good investing. And you have a chapter on accepting the long haul. Talk to us about what you mean there.
Absolutely. So, I mentioned the kind of the mental state in which this book was born out of. And one of the problems I saw in every organization I worked with, because it's a human problem, is we would mess up marketing execution because we couldn't accept the long haul. Things tend to play out like they should over time. They don't over a short period of time. I heard this story once about a statistics professor who would divide classes into like a bunch of groups, and half the groups he'd have them flip a coin every time and record their results on the board. The other half, he would tell them just to manufacture results on the board. Mm-hmm. And he would leave the room, and then he would come back in, and to the amazement of all the students, he would then point to every group that actually flipped the coin.
Right.
And he'd get it right 100% of the time. And, people would be like, how did you know? And it's because in a group that's actually flipping the coin every time, you will see runs 6, 7, 8 long of heads. But we, in our heads, we know it's 50-50.
Yeah.
And so we don't dare do a run of more than like 2 or 3.
2 or 3, yeah.
And, and then we'll do like a 2 or 3 and then we'll balance it out, because we're trying to impose rationality on the numbers, but the numbers are only rational over a very, very, very long data set. Mm-hmm. So you take this thing that we all have of trying to impose rationality on the numbers, and you might launch a new marketing campaign and you'll say like, oh, it's not working. We better change it. Well, now we've changed it, and the last month of data we had is no good anyway, because now we've changed it, and it's not performing like we thought we would again. So we're going to change it. And then it performs like we think it should, but it's not because it's actually working. It's just because we're in a weird run of the numbers. So we lock in. This is how it works. And then when it doesn't work like that in the future, we're at a loss and we don't know what to do. And, this is the way people are wired. I think, talking about advisors and investors, people who listen to this podcast and who want to grow their own money or help other people grow their own money, you have to really focus on this long haul. You have to get people to understand that if you look at too small of a sample size, it can corrupt, what conclusions you'll draw. You have to get people to accept the bigger sample size. That story I told with my daughter, that was my failing in that story, right? I took the first year for investing when I knew the market was performing irregularly. Mm-hmm. I was like, look what can happen. And my sample size was too small. As an example of, and it's fun when that's up, but the risk is in a down year, then I think, this investment strategy is no good. I have to thank you, because if it wasn't for your LinkedIn posts, I think I would have like moved a bunch of money out of accounts foolishly in like down years. But so one of the ways that I think, any of us can combat this period or this tendency to not want to accept the long haul, before you have any skin in any particular game, before you make an investment, when you're completely dispassionate about it, when you're not bleeding yet, think, what would success look like? Like, what do I want to see? And what kind of reasonable benchmarks do I need to know if I'm getting the success I want? Because if you were asking me to invest in a business, I don't think I would tell you, well, I want to see profitability in 4 weeks. It's just crazy. Like, I know it's crazy when I'm dispassionate. I'd say like, well, these are the things we want to see at a year. These are the things we want to see at 2 years. And around 4 or 5 years, I'll know if it worked. So make those decisions when you are dispassionate. Say, these are the times I'm going to check in. Or, encourage your clients to do that. Like, hey, let's do regular check-ins. I recently was trying to lose a bunch of weight, and I found weighing myself every day was really hard, because there are days where you stick to the diet and you weigh more.
Right.
If you weigh yourself once a week, you will see that mostly you just lose weight, that the day-to-day is rough. So one thing I talk about in the book for marketing departments, but for anyone who's trying to see a result from data, like, figure out what sample size you need ahead of time, and then don't cheat and look at the data before that time comes, because you're likely to impose your own rationality on the data if you do.
Yeah, incredible. I love that. I love that about the flipping coins. I love that anecdote. Daniel Staker, the book is To Market, How to Give a Damn and Take Things to the Next Level. Look, I'm not happy that you had a breakdown, but it seems like it birthed something really meaningful and something beautiful, and it's a great read. If people want to learn more about you, if they want to read the book, where can folks find you?
Yeah, the book is on Amazon, Audible, iTunes, all the good places. And they can find me at danielstaker.com, or they can find my business work at blackflagventure.com.
Hey, Daniel, thanks so much for coming by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.